where even if they would have got it, so let's say they get the 2-point conversion, it's 21-20. There was still about 31 seconds left on the clock where the Chargers, the way they were moving the football at times with chunk plays, they could have gotten themselves even back in field goal position then. So it wasn't like just because they hit that 2-point conversion, they were locked into a win. They could have played for overtime. They had moved the football very well throughout that game. They just hadn't converted a lot in terms of touchdowns, but they had momentum clearly on their side. If they tie the game being down and getting a late drive, I think you just play that momentum, go to overtime and trust your team to get the win. I just thought it was a panic move at that point. That could be something we're going to have to watch because again, Jacksonville is down right now. You could have gotten yourself in a position to get a game up on them. And we've seen Jacksonville's schedule's not that easy in terms of this week coming up with Philly, and then it gets a lot easier for this team. So you want to try to put as much room between them as you can and try to stack some wins between there because you already have a win versus them with the tiebreaker. If you could have got another game up, that's basically they're 2 games in the rear and you still play them. So I just thought it was a panic move by Vrabel. I didn't understand it. I know that seems to be what analytics are telling these guys is to go for these wins. And we saw Pat Shurmur Monday night make a weird play going for the 2 when they were down 8, when it was 20-12, he went for 2. And we've seen some other very aggressive moves happen. So I guess that's the way. I guess everybody's trying to sort of take the Doug Peterson route where we saw how aggressive he was last year and even in the Super Bowl. So we'll see if that comes back to bite the Titans as this year goes on. So we've got one more story left here in segment 1. And Eric, this is a story we've covered, it feels like, since day one of the podcast, and that's the protests in the NFL. It's back in the news, but not for actual protest. This is actually between 2 players that have been at the forefront of these protests that were actually jawing with each other on Sunday, and that included a post-game where Eric Reid actually called out Malcolm Jenkins and called him a sellout. So a little backstory here. Malcolm Jenkins is part of the Players Coalition. They worked with the NFL. So they actually got $100 million from the NFL donated to some of the programs that they stood behind as the Players Coalition. So after this deal was made, it seems that Eric Reid was upset because the deal didn't include a clause that Colin Kaepernick had to be signed with the team before the players would stop their kneeling protests. So Malcolm Jenkins, once he worked with the NFL, and he got the funding for the programs that they were looking for, he actually stopped kneeling. For some reason, that really bothered Eric Reid to the point that he went out publicly after this game in Philadelphia, and he called Malcolm Jenkins a sellout. So was Eric Reid right or wrong to call Jenkins a sellout and do it in this public manner?
I think you know my answer on this, right?
I have a pretty good feeling I know where you're going to go with this.
Yeah. No, he's absolutely wrong. Look, I am so sick and tired of this Kaepernick thing. The guy isn't even good at doing commercials. We found that out. I mean, he can narrate a bedtime story, I guess, if that's what Nike has shown us that he's qualified to do, but he's not qualified to be an NFL quarterback.
Does Nike sell bedroom slippers now? Because that commercial had zero energy.
Yeah, I think that's the Colin Kaepernick bedroom slipper edition. The fact that they wanted to tie a contract for Colin Kaepernick to some team in the NFL as sort of a token thank you gesture for what? All that you have done for the league? No, you've gone and you've done the things that you can do. You've shown your voice. You've given your opinions about what's going on. And look, we're not even going to get into all of that again. But I think the precedent that Eric Reid is expecting is dangerous, it's volatile, and it's downright wrong. So I think Jenkins' point of view is that we've done things that have contributed to the cause. We've done things that have made a difference or moved monies around and put them toward things that we believe in. Eric Reid, even this year, is still kneeling during the anthem, and he was the second guy to go along with Kaepernick to do that. He was without a job for a little while until the Panthers signed him. So I think he's still a little bit more personally invested in this. But yet, I just don't think you can continue the drama out that way because, once again, you're hurting your own cause by the way in which you do it. We've talked about that last year. We've talked about it ad nauseum. It seems like your message might be good, but the way that you're attacking it is wrong. And this is no different. So calling Malcolm Jenkins a sellout and getting people to get involved and be upset and then getting into a dust up on the field, it just doesn't look right. And to me, Justin, it sure doesn't look like unity.
To me, this undermines everything that they've been trying for. And it goes back to the point of what we've talked about several times. What is the overall point of you kneeling? What is your end point? What are you trying to accomplish by doing this? And this shows me, this answers the question that we've been asking, and it validates what we've said is they don't seem to have a point. Basically, what's bothered Eric Reid is that he feels Colin Kaepernick started this movement, and then Malcolm Jenkins kind of stepped in, took over, and it didn't go the direction that they wanted it to. And now Kaepernick's out of the league, and Jenkins isn't protesting anymore, so thus he's a sellout. But Malcolm Jenkins went out and actually did something. He got funding from the league. It doesn't matter where it came from. It doesn't matter what program that they took it from. They put it where you wanted it. They did what you wanted to do in terms of what Malcolm Jenkins and some of these other players like Anquan Bolton went out, and they were able to get funding to help try to fix the problems that needed to be talked about with that platform. And that, I guess, makes Eric Reid mad, because the problem I have with what Eric Reid is doing and now what he's saying, I haven't heard him talk a lick about what he is actually kneeling for and what he's trying to accomplish, other than now it seems like some type of protest for Kaepernick. It doesn't seem like it has anything to do with what this initially started for. Now it just seems like it's out of some kind of reverence for Colin Kaepernick. And so I think the sellout and the selfish guy here is Eric Reid, because he's got a platform and I never hear him talk. He had a microphone in his face on Sunday. Did you hear him talk about anything that why he's kneeling, other than calling another player who actually accomplished something a sellout? And again, bringing up Colin Kaepernick. I didn't hear him say anything about why he is kneeling and what social injustice that he's talking about and what he's trying to do to move the cause forward. So for me, the sellout here is Eric Reid, because all I see is a selfish player that is doing this now for him and Kaepernick. And meanwhile, Kaepernick's the guy who's now out there as the face of Nike doing commercials, and it doesn't seem like he's even interested in getting back into the league at this point. He turned down several contracts. He got himself a chance with the Ravens that his girlfriend ruined for him. So Eric Reid is barking up the wrong tree here, because the simple fact that they had $100 million that they could invest in different programs and different ways to actually help their cause, and he was going to hold that up over a contract, that devalues all that Kaepernick crap about sacrificing, because at that point, your movement is a selfish movement at that point. It's not about anybody else but you. And Eric, I just think it undermines the entirety of what these guys were trying to do with what I heard from Eric Reid on Sunday.
I couldn't agree more, so I'm not going to have anything else to say on that. But Justin, another selfish move was what the Lakers did with the Rockets the other night. Some guys getting involved in something that maybe they shouldn't have been even a part of. You'll talk about that and more when the NBA kicks off segment 2 right after this.
We are back here for segment 2, and it is Talkworthy time here on episode 222. Let's jump into the NBA. Saturday night was LeBron's debut in LA at the Staples Center, and it turned out to be boxing night at the Staples Center, as the Lakers and Rockets had quite the interesting night, as Rajon Rondo and Chris Paul decided to throw down, and Brandon Ingram decided he wanted to get a piece of the action as well. So the NBA decided they needed to dole out some suspensions. Ingram got 4 punches because basically he came in with a cheap shot out of nowhere. Rondo got 3 games, Chris Paul 2 games. So Eric, did the NBA get it right with the number of suspensions for this?
I'm actually going to agree with a lot of the talking heads in the media, which is quite rare because I don't like to do that. But I've listened to Max Kellerman and Stephen A. Smith and Michael Greenberg and a lot of guys and a lot of differing opinions. And I've sort of settled in on where I think I agree with. And it might surprise you because I like LeBron James. Obviously, that's no secret to anyone that listens to this podcast. And so my answer would be the antithesis to anything that would be good for LeBron James. And I think it's this. I think Ingram needs to be suspended for at least 10 plus games. Some people have said 15. Some people have said 20. I probably wouldn't be comfortable with anything more than 20. But if it was between 10 and 15, I'd feel okay with it because he came from across what felt like across the arena at that point, but he came from across the floor to basically throw an overhanded haymaker just into the pile. His suspension is warranted and should be a lot more. Now, the dynamic between Chris Paul and Rajon Rondo, there's also a history there. I know the league probably looked into all of that, but it was this whole debate about, at least in this game, did it start with Rondo actually spitting on Chris Paul? It's hard to tell in the videos, but you can see, although you can't see the saliva flying, you can see that when they're close up, Chris Paul does sort of wipe his cheek as if there was moisture that he was removing from his cheek. And, one could argue, okay, that probably came from Rajon Rondo. You just don't spit in anybody's face. I don't care if you're on a sporting field. I don't care if you're on a city sidewalk. I don't care where you are, at wrestling ring. It's just, that's probably a pretty low thing to do to someone. And so if Chris Paul is upset about that at Rajon Rondo, I don't blame him for taking a little shove in the old, kisser on that one. But then Rondo comes back with a pretty big swing. So for me, Justin, I thought Rondo should have got between 5 and 10, if not maybe even 10. And Chris Paul, I don't know, 1 or 2 was plenty, I think, for his part in this. I mean, he really didn't punch. He just kind of shoved in the face. And if he had just been spat on, you could understand the frustration there. So I think Rondo instigated this. I think Ingram instigated a whole lot more by flying into the pile like he was Marty Jannetty from the Rockers. I mean, it was crazy. Now, I want to hear your take on this as well, but I also want to hear your opinion because you and I were watching that game, and, one of the things I saw was that LeBron James, who did he hug and who did he pull away and sort of protect in that whole thing? It wasn't his own teammate. There's a lot of people kind of talking about that too. So this whole Lakers season is getting off to a little bit of a rocky start, but let me hear your take on all this.
I can't really disagree with anything you made. I thought the guy that got off way light, and he even said so himself that he thought he got off light, was Brandon Ingram. He had nothing to do with this. I think what happened with Rondo and Chris Paul, ultimately that kind of stuff is good for the league, to have some rivalry there, to have a matchup that's got something to it. The next time these two teams play, you're actually going to want to see them play. And I heard Sam Amick do an interview, who's now with The Athletic. He kind of put this in the timeline, and this dates back nearly 10 years, where these two just don't like each other. It started with USA Basketball, and then it got to the point where Rondo sort of hangs his title over Chris Paul, while Chris Paul feels he's the superior point guard of the two. So these two just haven't liked each other for years, and it just came to a head basically Saturday night. And they pushed and shoved, and yeah, they probably did a little more than NBA. I don't even know if those are technically punches. It was more like a point in the face and then a punch. But Ingram's was completely ridiculous. He should have been at least a minimum of 10 games, because that's what you don't want. Even if you think back to the video of Rudy Tomjanovich and that whole situation many, many years ago, you don't want that to happen where he connects with a guy with a blindside cheap shot. Or even if you're a Laker fan, what if he hits one of his own guys the way he come in there throwing that punch? He didn't seem like he was aiming at anybody. I mean, it would have been something if you actually knocked LeBron out or something. That would have actually been pretty funny to see that happen. But yeah, that's the first thing I noticed, was the guy that LeBron took out of there and sort of got away from the pile was his buddy Chris Paul. He wasn't really fighting for his team. He wasn't pulling on Rondo or anything. He separated and got Paul out of there, and he didn't even seem upset at him. So I thought the NBA, they got it right, I think, with Chris Paul. I thought they went light on Rondo, because there is a high-res video that's out there you can find on Twitter where you do see spit, or spittle, as they like to say, coming out of Rondo's mouth, and then you see the slow-mo reaction by Chris Paul, and then he reacts to that, which I think anybody would in that moment. So I didn't have a problem with what Chris Paul did, because I felt like Rondo, if he did spit, then he throws sort of a punch towards Chris Paul. So he's kind of doing two things there to instigate that, where Paul's reacting to his action. So I thought they got it right with Chris Paul. I thought Rondo should have been closer to the 4 to 5 range. And yeah, Ingram should have been in the 10 to 15 range. If you're going to do what they did years ago and come down hard on guys for what happened in Detroit, then you have to take a guy who comes flying in and throws that kind of punch. You have to do something more serious to him. 4 games is a slap on the wrist. It's just a mini vacation for him. He has to feel the effects of that. And you want to deter it, because now if someone messes with your guy and you're really pissed off at him, so what's 4 games in the middle of the season when you want to take a few games off anyways? To just go out and throw a punch at a guy and be like, okay, I'm only going to get 4 games. I'll lose a little bit of money from this. But hey, in that moment, what guys are sitting there calculating up how many game checks they're going to lose? They're just going to react to it. Unless the deterrent is, oh, crap, I could lose 15, 20, 25% of my pay for the year if I go in here throwing a cheap shot. Pushing and shoving, that kind of stuff, I think is fine for the league. The cheap shot, that's something that they should have came down much harder on.
Well, looking at the show notes, I know you're going to get into next some of the teams that are off to a slow start, and one of those teams is the Lakers. But Justin, I have to ask you because I heard it a couple times on